Okay, so the title of this video is Tour Radius, the key to consistent contact. And if you're familiar with some of my other teachings, my square to square swing method or the how to stop flipping tutorial, you kind of already probably know these things, but I think this video is actually going to fuse those two concepts together and show you why you might be having so much success with the square to square method and why the how to stop flipping video has really helped you. So my goal in this video is to just kind of show you what it is that tour players do throughout the hitting zone, that most tour players do throughout the hitting zone, that most amateurs do not. And that just has to do with this simple concept of creating a consistent radius or a constant radius through the hitting zone. All right, so let's get right into this. The term radius is kind of a geometry or mathematical term, and I think we're all pretty familiar with it. It's just the distance from the center of a circle to the outer edge of the circle. So when we think about the golf swing, a lot of the time we're looking at it as a circle, and maybe it's not an exact circle, but it's a good reference to just think about the swing, the entire swing motion as one big circle that the club head kind of traces on the way back and on the way through. So when we think about how radius is relative to that circle, we might just think about the distance between the club head and the center of that circle. Now, because we're setting up, and most of us with the square to square swing are setting up with the shaft in line with the left arm and leaning forward, that kind of just presets us for our impact position. Since we're doing that, we're creating a straight line from the club head to our left shoulder. We'll consider the left shoulder kind of the hub or the center or the starting point for this radius. So if I've got a player and he's set up at address with a vertical shaft alignment, coming into impact, for him to hit the ball solid and create a forward divot, he needs to have the handle slightly ahead of the ball at impact. And there are varying degrees on tour, but we'd like to see the handle just enough forward so that we can create a slightly descending blow with an iron. That will allow us to avoid hitting the ground on the way into the ball. But we don't want the handle forward and to have such a steep angle of attack that we actually make it really difficult to match up the club face or the center of the club face to the ball through impact. So how does that connect to the tour radius? Well, if I think about my left shoulder as the starting point and the club head as the ending point for this straight line, and I add a lot of wrist hinge or wrist cock in my backswing, what will actually happen is the distance from my left shoulder to the club head is going to get shorter. So imagine if I had a string and I pulled it taut and I connected it to my club head and then I did this, we would have some slack in that string now. So the distance would actually get shorter. So that's okay if I set up with a vertical shaft angle and I swing back and I create some of this angle or some of this hinging, that's fine as long as I maintain, as I'm coming through impact, as long as I maintain the distance from my left shoulder to the club head, or as long as I don't have an extreme changing rate through impact. But to make it simpler, and this is again why the square to square swing works so well, when I make it simpler and just preset that impact alignment and don't add a lot of wrist hinge or wrist cock in my backswing, when I do that, I'm creating a situation where I can have a constant radius or a constant distance from my left shoulder to my club head. So that helps me. That definitely helps me. And as we get into this next part, I think you're going to understand a little bit more why. So if I've got that distance already set at address, and I just use my shoulders to turn back and my shoulders to turn through, the club head's not getting any longer, or the distance isn't getting any longer through impact, nor is it getting shorter on the backswing. So I don't have to actually time this club getting longer to actually impact the ball at the right spot. So you can imagine if I had a lot of this change, if I had the club getting shorter or the length getting shorter on the backswing, I'd have to have it increase on the downswing, or I'd have to have some throwaway of the club in order for it to reach the ball. So this is where some of the flipping stuff comes into place. If I'm set up with this preset alignment where the shaft is in line with my left shoulder, and I come through and I stop my body rotation, and the centrifugal force of the club head, the weight of the club head's mass as it comes through, pulls through and overtakes my body rotation, I'm going to lose that radius. The club's going to actually get longer, and I can get fat shots really easily there. I can also get some early extension, so as I come through, as the club gets longer, I've got to stand up to keep the club from getting buried in the ground. So if we get really good at timing this, and we use our hand-eye coordination really well, we can find a way to time that and get the ball right at the bottom of that arc. But it's a little bit more difficult than, say, if I had my club traveling into impact with a constant radius, so that my club now no longer is getting longer or getting into the ground and I have to stand up. Now my club is kind of staying the same distance. As long as I continue to move this left shoulder and turn the body through, I can make it really easy to have a consistent low point in my swing with less overtake and less flipping through impact. So that's one major facet to the tour radius that I think really should clear some things up for you. When we look at tour players, we obviously see really solid contact. We see them hitting the ball first and then taking a divot after with most of their iron shots. But this doesn't necessarily have to apply to an iron shot. If we think about the driver, a club that we actually have the ability to hit up on if we'd like, because we can put it on a tee, we don't necessarily need to have a downward angle of attack as we're approaching the ball. We could, but it could create some more spin and a lower launch angle. So ideally, we'd like to reduce some of that spin and we'd have kind of a neutral launch angle and let the club do the work for us. But in order for that to happen, imagine if I've got a 10-degree driver and my radius is changing, my club's getting longer, I'm also adding loft through impact. So with that driver coming through, it's going to be 10 degrees at impact if I get to the straight up and down shaft alignment at impact. But if I have this flipping happening, I'm actually increasing the club's loft through impact pretty dramatically. And that increase in loft is actually going to increase my spin. So that's potentially spin's a good thing for you if you're a shorter hitter or you need to get the ball up in the air more. But realistically, to create the most solid collision, the most solid energy transfer, I'd like to have my club face really just kind of smashing into the ball rather than kind of glancing it or skipping it up into the sky. So when I think about how the tour radius applies to this aspect, the driving aspect of the game, when my club comes through and my left shoulder continues to rise, very much like a Dustin Johnson or one of the really long hitters in the game, if my left shoulder continues to rise, I'm kind of shallowing out or leveling out my angle of attack. So let's just say I've got a lot of forward shaft lean at this point right here. My hands are well ahead of the club head. As I come through, if I raise this left shoulder enough, I can maintain all that shaft lean. And what's actually going to happen is, as my shoulder goes up, that's going to pull my handle up. So a club that was traveling downward a lot on its way to impact is actually going to shallow out and have a nice, really long, low flat spot. So that goes back to the Chris Como video, which I think is so great. It's something that tour players do, and the average golfer just doesn't have a quite handle on what it is maybe or how to do it. And there's only really one way we can do this. We can't do this with an open club face approaching impact. If our club face is open approaching impact and we try to hold this angle, we obviously can't hit a straight shot. We'd actually have to, with an open club face, raise the left shoulder, roll the left wrist, and drop the club down to the ball. Or we potentially could see some raising of the left shoulder, rolling of the forearms, and the early spine extension to get the club face back to square. So if I've got the club already in a square position on its way to the ball, as I come through, I can actually raise that left shoulder, shallow out my angle of attack, and get this really long, level, flat spot through the bottom of my swing. So obviously, if I've got a really constant radius or a really long, level, flat spot at the bottom of my swing, it's going to be so much easier to ensure that I hit the ball in the same place on the club every time. If that club's getting longer and then shorter, again through impact, the distance from my left shoulder to the club head's changing very, very rapidly at the bottom of the swing, then it's going to be hard for me to get that club to actually hit the ball in the center of the face. So a lot of really, really majorly impactful things are happening when I'm maintaining these alignments through impact and raising that left shoulder as I come through. I'm shallowing the angle of attack, especially helpful in a driver. I'm maintaining this distance between the left shoulder and the club face, so it's going to make it a lot easier for me to strike the ball solidly. And if I've got the club face in a square hitting position coming into impact, then I can really just drive that left shoulder and the body through the hit as hard as I want. And because that club face is already square to the arc, if I really just fire that left shoulder and the body through, I can make sure, I can be sure that the club face is going to deliver to the ball with a square face, and the harder I swing, the faster it's going to go. Or the harder I turn my body, the faster I turn my body, the more I move my left shoulder, the faster that club head's going to come through impact, the shallower the angle of attack, and the more solid and consistent I'm going to hit it. So that was a lot of concepts, and I know that it was a lot of concepts, but if you need more insight, definitely feel free to check out the Square to Square videos. I've got a great course on my website with over 30 videos that go into great detail about the Square to Square swing, and also a great tutorial on how to stop flipping, which I think this fits right into. So I hope that helps. Again, our big keys are that coming through impact, we'd like to already have the club face in a square position ready to hit the ball. And then coming through impact, we're going to try to maintain the radius between our left shoulder and the club head by rotating the body and turning the body through impact, whether that's with a driver or an iron or a hybrid or any club in your bag. The longer, the more gradual, the more shallow, the more, I think gradual is the right term. The more gradual your angle of attack and the more consistent it is, the easier it's going to be to hit it solid.